Alright, we've already talked about preventative maintenance techniques that you can use on both the AC series bikes and the IC series bikes. But now we need to talk about some maintenance we can only perform on the IC bikes, and this has to do with the brake pads. We know that that's how we have resistance on our machine and also our braking system. So let's talk about preventative maintenance for those particular items, which includes lubrication with a silicone-based lubricant and also making sure that they're recentered when reattaching them to the bike. First, using my 4mm Allen bolt, I'm going to go ahead and remove the screw here, which includes a screw, 2 washers, and a spring. And I'll just set them down here. I'm also going to loosen up the other side, which will allow me an easier access to remove the brake pads. So there's one, and I'll simply go to the other side and do the same thing and remove the second one. So the next piece will be take your silicone-based lubricant, simply pour a small amount into a tub, and then go ahead and put your brake pads in there. And you're going to let that silicone lubricant saturate those brake pads. So I'll be right back after those brake pads have saturated using that silicone lubricant, and we'll talk about how to reinstall them. Now I've allowed enough time for my brake pads to soak up that lubricant, so I'm going to go ahead and remove them from my tub and reattach them to the bike. You'll also notice that I have some extra rags here, which I think is very important for a couple of reasons. One is when you remove them from the silicone tub, you're going to make sure to wipe off any extra lubricant that's there. Now, even though this is a preventive maintenance technique, this is also some troubleshooting for you. If you ever have an issue where your brake pads are squealing, one of the first things you want to check is your brake pads. Make sure that they're felt, you have a decent amount of width to them still, so they're still in good shape. And if they do have enough width, then you're going to go ahead and lubricate those brake pads. If they don't, then you want to go ahead and replace them completely and then go ahead and lubricate them before attaching them to your bike. These brake pads are still in good condition. We've lubricated them now. I'm going to go ahead and reattach them to the bike. One thing I want to make sure that I do is make sure they stay centered on the flywheel. And we'll talk about that here in a few more minutes after I reattach them. Remember the extra rags I was talking about? Always very important. The silicone lubricant, when you're wiping the extra off, can get on your hands, which makes it difficult for you to attach those brake pads. Again, using my 4mm, I'm going to go ahead and tighten down the brake pads. There we go. Grabbing the thread, we'll screw it until it's nice and snug. Looks good. My brake lever's at full up, so we're completely away from the flywheel. I'm going to go ahead and reattach the other side now as well. And again, use my 4mm. I'm going to go ahead and tighten that screw down so it's nice and snug. Looks good. I'm going to go ahead and take one of my clean rags. I'm going to rotate my flywheel and I'm going to remove or wipe down any extra silicone lubricant that has attached itself to the flywheel as the brake pads are passing. Make sure it's nice and clean and ready to go. So remember, that's how you lubricate your pads. I've reattached my brake pads to my actual bike. If you ever get any squealing, again, check your brake pads, make sure they're still in good condition, and if they are, go ahead and lubricate them and reattach them back to your unit. If the actual felt on the brake pads are worn and need to be replaced, please call Nautilus and we'll replace those brake pads for you. The last thing I want you to look at before you complete the process is make sure that your brake pads are centered around your flywheel. And you can tell that just by rotating. I'm in the full up position and I have an even amount of space between both my brake pads and my flywheel. If you don't, you can go ahead and remove this plug here. Whoop, it's kind of a booger. It does fly around on it a little bit. And either using a 10mm socket wrench or this nut driver here, it's 3/8. I can go ahead and loosen up this bolt here, which will loosen up my brake pad assembly, and I can recenter those brake pads, retighten it back down on the flywheel so it is centered on the flywheel and they're not rubbing up there when it's in the full up position. So that concludes our preventative maintenance, lubricating the brake pads, any issues with brake squealing, and then also checking to make sure that your brake pads are centered around your flywheel.